This is my filterless, self-cleaning aquarium where plants and microorganisms handle most of the maintenance for me. I've published a full article explaining how it all works, which I link to in the description, but here's a quick overview. Fast-grown plants stabilise the cycle by absorbing ammonium as a nutrient, which helps passively prevent the buildup of toxic ammonia and nitrite. Once ammonium levels drop, they switch over to using nitrate as their nitrogen source, further reducing the need for water changes. These same plants also absorb a wide range of dissolved solid ions to fuel their growth, which naturally manages TDS levels to help keep things safe. Meanwhile, microorganisms, shrimp and snails break down decaying organic matter in the tank so I don't have to gravel vacuum. This is the month 3 update for the tank, and a few things have changed, most notably the Staghorn algae breakout, but I'll go into that in more detail later. So the first thing that I want to talk about is adding new plants to the tank because I've decided to remove the Bacopa from the back left of the tank. I'm 99% sure that was Bacopa compact, not Bacopa Monnieri as it was sold to me. One of my friends has since emailed me saying that Lynx Pond Plants has real Bacopa Monnieri in stock, so I may still get to give it a try one day. While switching the plants over, I decided to do one last large water change to help reset the tannin buildup from the corbo catfish wood in the tank, which can help cloud the water. With any luck, this should be the last water change for a while with this tank, as it goes into my regular maintenance routine of 1 or 2 water changes per year unless there's an emergency. At the same time, I did decide to remove some Limnophila sessiliflora from the back right corner. It was starting to become problematic by dominating that side of the tank, restricting swim space and overshadowing the Ludwigia Mini Super Red. Speaking of which, I had picked up 2 more pots of Ludwigia, this time Ludwigia palustra Super Red, which I do think is the exact same plant as Ludwigia Mini Super Red. I decided to add it to that back left corner once the Bacopa was removed to add more red to that area. With the water level being low, I also decided to trim back the houseplant roots in the tank because it was surprising how quickly they can grow. This is the tray with everything that I removed from the tank, and you can see all of the Bacopa on the left hand side and a massive amount of Limnophila sessiliflora on the right hand side. But it is worth noting that a lot of this Limnophila plant mass was just secondary or even tertiary stems, that the original stems were thrown up from the base. I did trim off some of the healthy tops from the Limnophila and replant them back into the tank. This helps to keep things neat and make it easier to manage how many Limnophila sessiliflora stems are in the tank. Adding the new Ludwigia was a bit of a pain with my tripod in the way because of the height of the tank and how close I have to be, so I had to do it off camera, but you can see the new Ludwigia in the tank in this clip. It's completely normal for this plant to start out green because it needs the anthocyanin in its leaves to build up to give it that red hue, which takes time. I know that some people do get worried about trimming stem plants as low as I have with this Limnophila sessiliflora in filterless tanks, but in my experience, specifically with Limnophila sessiliflora, it's been perfectly fine. That's because it bounces back from a trim extremely quickly, and I'm talking hours instead of days, and it's also the fastest growing submerged plant that I've ever kept in the hobby, so it quickly gets back to that natural water purification. But to double check, I did a water parameter test the day after, and for 3 consecutive days after that one, and every single time there was no ammonia and no nitrite in the tank. Next up is the Staghorn algae breakout, which is both a blessing and a curse for this tank. It's a blessing in the sense that it gives me a chance to demonstrate how a system like this can naturally rebalance itself when things go wrong, like an algae breakout, but it's also a curse because it really makes a tank look unsightly until the algae is gone. Now, I could use chemical treatments to get rid of it quickly, but I've never been a fan of using chemicals to deal with algae, even though it's a far more efficient method. Personally, I just wait and let nature take its course. From what I can tell, there's 4 potential causes behind this outbreak, and in reality it's probably a little bit of all 4. The first is the melting of the immerse-grown Helenthium telonym green plants from month 1 and 2. As those leaves melted, they would dump a lot of excess nutrients back into the water column at a time when there's also excess nutrients leaking out of the topsoil in the substrate. Now, I check my water parameters a lot and I didn't see any dangerous spikes in any of the toxic compounds, but these additional nutrients probably gave the algae what it needed to get a foothold in the tank. The second factor will be the limited water change style of this particular method that I'm using with this tank, because when some plants are melting their immersed grown leaves, the common fix for that is to do a water change to get rid of all of those excess nutrients as quickly as possible. The third issue is the lighting, because I'm using Echinodorus A2 lights on this tank and they are just too powerful for their cost for a low-tech tank. There's no point spending this much money if you can't even run them at 50% on a relatively short photo period, but I am tweaking things to see what I can get out of them. A few days ago I was honestly considering swapping all three of them off my tanks and putting some Haiger 957s on there, or even the more affordable and budget-friendly Sierra SR616 lights. But I have the Echinodorus A2 turned down to 30% intensity for a 6-hour photo period right now on this specific tank, so I'll see how it does this month. The fourth and final contributing cause may be the water flow from the USB water pump. I was watching the New Horizon Aquatics maintenance video earlier today and they pointed out that they noticed the blackbeard algae they have issues with in that specific tank is in areas of direct flow. Now, they were talking about blackbeard algae, and this is Staghorn algae, which is technically a type of red algae, but the same thing could be true because I have noticed it's directly where the water flow from the USB pump goes. So here's my plan to try and fix a Staghorn algae problem in this tank as quickly as possible. The large water change I did while replanting the Ludwigia should have removed any of the leftover nutrients from the melting Helanthium telanum green in the tank, but in reality a lot of that should have been absorbed by the algae and the other plants by now anyway. As I said, I've also dialed the Echinodorus A2 light all the way down to 30% and restricted it to a 6-hour photo period. At this intensity level, there's no point in buying these lights in my opinion for a low-tech tank. There's far more affordable options on the market which will perform just as well. But the far lower light intensity should hopefully help get this algae under control. The excess nutrients from the topsoil in the substrate should also have dissipated by now due to the age of the tank, which means it's also safer to remove the USB water pump and get rid of that water flow source. Since Staghorn algae has a tougher fibre structure than brown diatom or soft green algae, even once it's started to melt back, it still takes a few weeks before it starts to get soft, and my shrimp and snails in the tank will start to eat it. But with a little bit of patience, hopefully it should disappear within a month or two. Moving on, and we get to the Alternanthera Reineckii mini and the Lagenandra Meeboldii Red plants, which have both started to have issues in the tank. Now, I'll freely admit that with hindsight bias it was a little silly to use plants that I have very little experience with in a monthly follow-along video, but the past is the past. Alternanthera Reineckii mini is generally considered a more challenging plant when keeping it in a low-tech tank, so it's probably not the best fit for this type of tank anyway. But the Lagenandra Meeboldii Red should be doing fine in this setup. I actually have two of them thriving over in my 40-gallon community tank where they were planted just a few weeks prior to this tank being set up. The growth difference between the two is night and day, so there is definitely a problem with this specific tank. I'm guessing that the house plants are just grown so quickly now that they are stripping out a huge amount of nutrients that would otherwise be available for my submerged plants, resulting in growth and nutrient deficiencies. Now, I know that I mentioned earlier that excess nutrients may have triggered the Staghorn algae breakout, but in my experience it's usually excess phosphates that correlate directly with that type of outbreak. Since this tank hasn't had any significant nitrate hits on my test kit for a long time, I'm suspecting that there's actually two different micronutrient imbalances in the tank. There's potentially excess phosphates driving the algae growth, while there's also a lack of nitrates affecting the Alternanthera Reineckii mini and the Lagenandra Meeboldii Red. And that brings me on to the houseplants sitting on the rim of the tank with their roots in the water. While these really are excellent at managing higher bioload tanks, they're just not necessary for this specific tank because I have a relatively small colony of celestial pearl Danios, some Neocaridina shrimp, some Armano shrimp, and a Neurite snail in here. Because the Tradescantia has easy access to atmospheric CO2, it grows far quicker than my submerged plants and is potentially outcompeting them for nutrients. For that reason, I've decided to remove the houseplants from this tank, and some of them will be going into pots to add detailing to my aquarium racks, and some of them might be going over to my 40-gallon tank to help deal with the nutrient imbalance there. After removing them, I do plan to keep a close eye on the nitrogen compounds in this tank using my test kit just to see if they do increase. Even though most of the nitrogen compounds in this tank should theoretically at least be consumed at the ammonium level relatively close to the start of the plant-based cycle, personally I do still like to see some detectable nitrate at the end of the plant-based cycle in the water, just so I have an indicator that there is a nitrogen source in there if the plants need it. My current theory is that with the houseplants removed, the excess nutrients that they would have been absorbing will benefit the Alternanthera Reineckii mini and Lagenandra Meeboldii Red and hopefully increase their growth rates. On top of that, it might also help the Helenthium telanum green carpeting plant in the foreground carpet even faster, but to be honest, it's really stepped up the last week or two. Now, just to offer a quick update on the Celestial Pearl Danios in the tank, because they are doing fine. As far as I can tell, they've started to breed again, so there might be more babies on the way. I'm not 100% sure if it's a new baby that's been born in this tank or if it was one of the 3 tiny little babies I moved over a few weeks ago from their old tank, but I did see a tiny little baby Celestial Pearl Danio in here a few days ago. So it does seem that the population of the Celestial Pearl Danios in here may be increasing already. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching, I hope it's been helpful, and good luck with any similar style tanks you try in your own fish room.